Hey everyone, welcome back for part 3 of the Boomsday Project card review. We got a lot to go over, so let's go ahead and get straight to it. We will start with the neutrals as always. First, let's start with Starliner. 7 mana, 7/7. These are fine vanilla stats. I mean, it's a War Golem plus. Okay. Battle Cry. If you control 3 minions with 7 health, deal 7 damage to all enemies. So, in order for this effect to trigger, you really got to make the stars align. Now, if I understand this correctly, this minion, when you play it, does count as one of the 7. So you need to have two other minions with 7 health. So, I mean, it's triple 7s, right? Ding, 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 ding. So, how easy is this effect to hit? Well, I think not very. The trouble is there aren't really that many minions that have naturally 7 health, even including those in wild mode, especially restricting this to standard. There just aren't that many minions that have 7 health. Like, the ones that immediately jump to mind are Doomsayer. I mean, some people have suggested, what if you play out a Doomsayer, your opponent silences it, you've just got a 7 health minion sitting on the board. That doesn't seem like a good plan for triggering this card, you know, if you want to set up on this card. War Golems. I feel like this is the most likely deck for this to be able to trigger in is probably going to be a Priest with injured Blade Masters and possibly War Golems. You wouldn't even want to combo this with a Doomsayer. Even if you had a silenced Doomsayer on the board, you wouldn't want to play a Doomsayer and then play this, because you've essentially cleared your opponent's board by dealing 7 damage to everything, and now there's a Doomsayer on the board that's going to clear your board as well. Wouldn't you rather be ahead by a 7/7? So yeah, the only way I can really imagine this triggering is if you have some sort of Priest deck that can Circle of Healing in combination with this. If you put like let's say 2 injured Blade Masters out the turn before, and then somehow they don't die or they get healed or something like this, and then on the following turn you can Circle of Healing them back up to 7 and then Starliner. The only other way I can think of possibly triggering this is in combination with Power Word Shield on minions that have 5 health, of which there are several. I think there are several decent 5 health minions you could land a Power Word Shield on. But overall, I think this card is very weak, just because the effect is so awkward to get to trigger. It's an overwhelmingly powerful effect, but you wouldn't want to play a vanilla 7/7. There's no deck that plays that, and getting this effect to trigger is just going to be too difficult. Even if you could reliably get it to trigger, building a deck around this in order to enable this is really awkward. I mean, pretend this is somehow like a four card board clear, essentially. Like, that's not good. Mechanical Whelp. Death Rattle. Summon a 7/7 Mechanical Dragon. Obviously, there's synergy here with the Starliner, because if you play this out on turn 6 and your opponent doesn't kill it, or I should say doesn't kill this and then the follow-up body, then you can trade this in to get a 7/7, and that is 2 of 3. This is essentially a giant egg, right? You know, talking Nerubian Egg or Devilsaur, Ravasaur Egg, whatever it is. The 0/3 that Hunter is playing right now. Is this a good card? Obviously, you want to play this along with things that trigger its Death Rattle for free. So I could hypothetically see this seeing play in like a Death Rattle Hunter. But I feel like it's too slow, because Death Rattle Hunter puts out 0/3s, which you can't do anything with, but Death Rattle Hunter has enough free ways to get 5/5s off of that egg that the opponent is pretty much forced to clear to clear the egg themselves. I don't know if people have been watching competitive Hearthstone, but this has been brought up a whole bunch in Egg Hunter right now, which is that you can't afford to leave the egg on the board because your opponent is going to play dead it, he's going to cube it, he's going to Terror Scale Dreadstalker, I think it is. It's a 3-mana 3/3 that triggers a death rattle. So you have to kill the egg in Hunter. Against Hunter, I should say. And this is just a little bit too late for that. Like, instead of a 3-mana egg, you're getting a 6-mana egg that has 2 attack, so can trade in itself, but that doesn't really matter. Being able to trade it off doesn't really matter. And on top of that, you're only getting an extra 2/2 of stats on the thing inside the egg. So for 3 extra mana, I feel like that's pretty late in the game. Would you play this instead of, like, Savannah Highmane? I don't know. I could possibly see some worlds where a 2/2 death rattling into a 7/7 is better than a 6/5 death rattling into 2/2s, especially if there is mech synergy in that deck. Other things this might see play in is, I mean, they're trying to push a value-based death rattle priest. I don't really see that here. In terms of a 6-mana card that death rattles into something awesome, I think Priest would rather run Dragons, especially because that enables the Duskbreaker. I'm referring specifically to Bone Drake, right? If you had a 6-mana card that death rattles into something awesome, I feel like you'd play Bone Drake plus Duskbreaker in there. So overall, I feel this is a big egg niche card that has the benefit of being a mech. So if a mech egg deck comes around, I could see this seeing play. But in general, I don't feel like this fits into any deck right now, and there's not really the cards around to enable this. 6-mana Missile Launcher, Magnetic. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all other characters. So compare this to War Gear, I suppose. This is 5-mana 5/5. This is 6-mana 4/4. So on 6 mana, they're pretty much clearly telling us that Magnetic should cost you approximately a stat. Typically for 5 mana, you see vanilla 5/6s. So Magnetic plus Mech is going to be a 5/5. So this ought to be a Magnetic 6/6. Instead, it's a 4/4. So you're losing 4 stats for the end of the turn, deal 1 damage to all other characters effect. Is this a good effect? Some people have said, hey, you know, what if you combine this with ways to give this poisonous? So it's just a persistent board clear. Unfortunately, it's all other characters, so it's going to wipe your own board, which kind of sucks. Primarily, I would see this... I could imagine this hypothetically maybe seeing play in some sort of... against token decks, I suppose. Right now, if you consider, like, Even Lock currently runs... I forget what it's called. The 6-mana 6/6 that battle cries 1 damage to everything on the board, right? This is a 6-mana 4/4 of that with a persistent effect, and it's a mech instead of a demon. Would you play... I mean, the thing is, the reason that card is in that deck is sort of as a nod to Odd Paladin and just wanting to clear off tokens. So if you're really desperate for the ability to consistently AoE down tokens, like you might see from... a priest, possibly? Because the only real strong, weak... The only consistent, weak AoE that a priest has is Spirit Lash, and that's 2 of. Something like a Big Mage has tons of AoE. Druid has swipes, but can also Spreading Plague against tokens. So this I feel like I'd be most likely to see in something like a priest, if they're desperate for token killing. In general, I don't think that's going to happen, so I would consider this a very niche card, which in general will not see play, but maybe in some fringe circumstance we could see people starting to play this as token removal. Alright, let's move on to class cards. Warrior. Lots of new stuff here. I believe I already covered Beryllium Nullifier, Super Collider, and Dr. Boom Mad Genius, so we'll move on to Omega Assembly. Discover a mech. If you have 10 mana crystals, keep all 3 cards. So, clearly they're trying to push a heavy warrior mech deck. I should say, I misspoke. They're heavily trying to push warrior mech in the form of this card, giving your mechs rush, this card, discovering a mech. Is this a good card? It's tough to say. It is 1 mana, add 3 cards to your hand, but in general, the mechs we have seen, I have felt, are not that crazy. Especially, you know, if you go back and if you actually look through here, if you add a war gear, it's sort of fine. It's just something to do combat with. If you get a faithful Lumi, you're pretty sad. Something like a weaponized pinata would be actually quite good off of this, because clearly if you're running this card, you're running this for late game tools, sort of a refill function, right? If you're playing Control Warrior and hit turn 10 and you just don't have any threats to put on the board, this is a way to generate threats. And that can be anything from extremely good threats. For example, if you discover 3 weaponized pinatas, you couldn't, but pretend that you could. This is also add 3 legendary minions to your hand, which is good for maintaining momentum. But in general, I feel like the average mech is not that good, and it's pretty decently likely that you're just gonna whiff. You're gonna play this card on 10 mana crystals, and you're gonna get 3 cards in your hand that are like, these are all mediocre. Especially combining with something like Eternium Rover, which is maybe fine, but not in the late game. So general analysis, could be good. I could see how this could be a decent momentum maintaining card in some sort of mid to late game mech warrior. I just noticed that they have mech warrior. The year is 3100. But yeah, so I could possibly see this being good in some sort of mid to late game mech warrior, but I don't know. Maybe the fact... This is the thing. Playing this card on 1 feels okay to me in that it augments your hand with whatever you're missing. Like, take Arena, for example. If you play this on turn 1 and you don't have any turn 3, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4 plays, you just look for something low, and that's fine. Or you can top deck this when you're on turn 10 and you feel pretty good adding 3 cards to your hand. So if we see some sort of meta where it's a little closer to Arena, like super heavy control, blah, 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 just looking for cards to generate threats, this might see play. Eternium Rover, 1 mana, 1/3. Whenever this minion takes damage, gain 2 armor. Some people have been comparing this to Armorsmith. I think Armorsmith is better in that it synergizes with your Whirlwind effects a lot more. Like, you can get huge volumes of armor, off of Armorsmith. But this is only going to generate you a maximum of 6. I could imagine putting this in a deck, in a control deck. Like, right now, I believe Quest Warrior is running... what are they called? Acolytes of Pain for card draw. But even that deck doesn't run Armorsmiths for armor. It runs the 2/2s that give you armor based on how many opponents or how many enemy minions are on the board. In terms, I could imagine putting this into a tempo-based deck where you want to have 1/3s on the board. You want to buff them with something like Cruel Taskmaster. You know, if you've got some sort of aggro/tempo warrior going on, I could maybe see playing this to be a sticky body to be buffed later on. In which case, the 2 armor would be a nice value effect, but not really what you're looking for in that deck. You know, if you're an aggro deck, you don't generally care about generating armor, I think. So this is a very strange mixed effect where you'd want the armor gain in a deck where you wouldn't want to play this, and you want a 1/3 in a deck where you don't care about the armor gain. So I'm not sure that there's enough synergy here. So I suspect this probably will not see play outside of a 1/3 body to hit with buffs in an aggro deck. Boomship, the legendary warrior spell. Summon 3 random minions from your hand. Give them rush. I think this card is awesome. Is it good? I don't know. Is it awesome? Yes. So, is there a big warrior? Sort of. There is a recruit woe cleaver type warrior right now. Weapon removal is very common, so that deck does suffer from the woe cleaver repeatedly getting destroyed. Also, you have a bad tendency to draw all of your big cards and put them in your hand. And you don't want them in your hand with woe cleaver. You want to recruit them out of your deck. Pretend this was, and this is the thing, this synergizes really well with recruit in that recruit pulls minions from your deck, this pulls minions from your hand. And on top of this being in your hand says, because if you have 3 huge minions and you pull them out and give them rush, you know, let's say you get Lich King, Grom, and Ysera. I don't know. Ysera isn't great to give rush to, but, you know, that's 2 pretty huge minions to give rush to, which gives you really pretty decent tempo onto the board. I feel like this is a really good way for Big Warrior to have a huge tempo swing turn. What I'm really curious about, I mean, so here's the question. Is Big Warrior something that's even pseudo-viable? It's fun. I don't know how good it is. I actually haven't seen it played at the very top tier very much. This could possibly push it into some slightly higher level of viability, but it only being a one-of spell in your deck does have consistency issues. The second thing I'm super curious about with this card is whether there's a combo deck this works really well with. Because the rush that you give it does not overwrite charge that it may already have. So could you do some sort of like charged Devilsaur, Grom Hellscream Whirlwind deck off of this? Do like a 9 mana OTK charge for 24? Except a lot of decks have taunts and healing right now, so it feels not quite good enough. I think that would be a funny deck. You know, double charge Devilsaur plus Grom. You could even go really, really late game with your combo and Dead Man's Hand extra Groms into your deck, draw those, and then just plan on playing Boomship and summoning 3 Groms from your hand, then Whirlwind for 30 charging damage. Is that a good combo? No, but it's an option. I will be curious to see if there's... The thing is, I don't have a completely encyclopedic knowledge of all of the cards in the game, so some things might have interesting interactions that would let you combo something really ridiculous. We'll see. Are there ridiculous combos? Could this be the key to a combo deck? Maybe. I don't know what cards would go into that. I don't know what that combo is, but it could be. I do think this could be the keystone of a combo deck later on somewhere if they release the right cards for it. Warlock. No new cards here. We'll skip over that. Shaman. Eureka. Summon a copy of a random minion from your hand. It is worth mentioning this is a copy. It doesn't summon the actual card from your hand, so this is one way to like duplicate minions, or duplicate legendary minions. The first thing that immediately occurs to me with this card is it reminds me of Ancestor's Call, if I'm remembering correctly, from... wow, where was that from? I want to say it was TGT. TGT Shaman had an Ancestor's Call Malygos burn deck, where you would Ancestor's Call, which cost 4, pull Malygos from your hand, because you'd make sure it was the only card in your hand, and then you'd have 6 mana left over to burn your opponent in the face with, which was like Lightning Bolt for 8, Lightning Bolt for 8. I think they had Crackle at that time, so that was 8 to 13 damage, and then a second Crackle for 8 to 13 damage, so you're talking 32 to 42 damage off of that combo. That deck wasn't particularly good. It was fun, sure, but it was weak for a lot of other reasons. My 2 questions hearkening this back to that deck are, 1, this is 6 mana instead of 4, and we don't have Crackle in the game, so there are significantly less burn options. I actually should check really quick. Is Zap targetable at heroes? No. Minions only. So, yeah. The lack of cheap burn means I think there are not quite enough ways to tie a 6-mana Malygos to burn in order to OTK someone. If there's some way of changing that, like if Thaurissan was still in the game, that would be a different story. But he's not. And if you were going to Wild, looking for a Malygos Thaurissan deck, you would just run Ancestor's Call instead. Are there other cards in your deck or in the game that you might be happy summoning a copy of? And I think in general, no, just because this suggests the idea of a big shaman, and I think too often you're going to have minions in your hand that you don't want to hit with this, right? If you have a 3-mana minion, a 5-mana minion, and then a 10-mana minion that you want to copy, I don't know what that would be, you're not going to want to play this, just because what are your odds of hitting either the 3 or the 5, which you're not happy about? Which means you can only play this alongside cards that you're happy cheating out for 6, which aren't that many. I mean, Lich King for 6, sure. Ysera for 6, sure. But it's low tempo, high value. Could Big Shaman be a thing? I don't know. The tools are maybe there with Volcano, Healing Rains, etc., etc., etc. But right now the best, I'm going to say, slow value Shaman deck is Shutterwalk, and I don't think this deck is going to be better than Shutterwalk, so I don't suspect this will push out the current Shaman meta. Alright, moving on to Rogue cards. Quite a few things here. Let's start. We already got Myra's Unstable Element and Lab Recruiter. Move on to Blightnozzle Crawler. 4 mana 2/4, Death Rattle, summon a 1/1 ooze with Poisonous and Rush. This is a really good card if you're going up against a big deck, so because you want that 1/1 ooze to hit something big, not a token, right? The issue with this card is if your opponent kills it on their turn, you're sad, because they just ping off the ooze. Whether it's with a Dagger Stab, a Druid Hero Power, Mage Ping, whatever. You know, Paladin trades off a token. So if this itself had Rush, I think it would be better. Because then you could play it, trade it off, get the ooze with Poisonous, trade that off as well. The fact that it gives your opponent the option to respond to this in their own way makes it not good enough. Pogo Hopper. The new Jade mechanic is what I've seen this one called. Battle Cry. Gain +2/+2 for each other Pogo Hopper you played this game. So the first copy is a 1/1. The second copy is a 3/3, the third copy is a 5/5, so on and so forth. You combine this with something like Valera plus Lab Recruiter, and obviously you can get lots of these in play. And I think that's cool. I like the fact that it's not actually infinite, it's just big. You know, let's say you don't even hit any of these with Valera. Let's say you get 2 off of this, plus 6 off of this, you're going to get a total of 8 played. So that's going to be 8 times 2 is 16. So the last one of these would be a 17/17 for 2 mana, which is pretty good. That is a slow, value-based rogue. Does that kind of deck have room for it? I think no, simply because rogue doesn't have any good healing or defensive mechanics. If you look at all of the really slow decks right now, they all have healing mechanics. Warlock, Gul'dan, plus Dark Pax, plus Amethyst Spellstone. Priest, innate healing, plus other things that it does for healing. Mage, you lose the game if you don't draw Frostlich Jaina, and frankly, I think that's more a function of losing the lifesteal and the ability to heal than about losing the elementals. Shaman, Healing Rain, Warrior, Armor, Paladin, currently only playing aggro, doesn't really tend to heal because it is just always the aggressor. Hunter, a lot of the time, Hunter versus aggro, especially like Deathstalker Rexar, does often come down to whether you can get a 2 mana 1/3 charge lifesteal off of your Build-A-Beast. So same deal, you're looking for lifesteal in that deck. I said Shaman, so that leaves just pretty much Rogue. Druid has a ton of armor gain. So does Rogue have a way to gain health? Not that I know of. And I think that is what really stops a value-based Rogue right now, is not enough defensive options. That being said, if Rogue has some way of getting defensive options, this could be fantastic. I especially think about playing, let's say, even 2 of these alongside a Vanish, right? If it's turn 10 and your opponent plays out something big, Dragon Caller or Alana, and you Vanish and then play 2 of these after you've already played, let's say, 2, then you play Vanish into a 2 mana 7/7 plus a 2 mana 9/9, and that's pretty awesome. So, yeah, that's my only question here. Can Rogue thread together enough survival tools for this to work? The other big way I could see that being done is with large lifesteal Kingsbanes, but that deck tends to just want to kill its opponent with the actual weapon. Does this fit into that deck? I'm not sure. You could possibly run this as like a secondary threat package to your Kingsbane, just because that deck does already run Vanishes. So I could hypothetically, and on top of that, that deck also runs weapon buffers with Battle Cries, so adding this to it could be good. So I do think this card plus this card obviously want to be played together, and I do think both of those already fit into an existing deck in the form of the Kingsbane Rogue. And add to those deck a little bit of extra consistency. So I think these might be play. They might make up, let's say, a third to a half of pushing Kingsbane Rogue into being a more consistent threat. Academic Espionage. Shuffle 10 cards from your opponent's class into your deck. I've seen this misconstrued as shuffle 10 cards from your opponent's deck into your deck, which is extremely different because 10 random cards from your opponent's class, the average class card is but 10 cards from your opponent's deck are all going to be extremely high quality. However, these cost 1, and that's bonkers. There are very few cards, I think, from an opponent's class that in general you're going to be sad to have in your deck for only 1 mana. The bad things obviously are 1-drops, you know, Mana Worms, 1 mana 1/3 mechs from Warrior, stuff like that. But this also lets you hit things like Antonidas for 1, or Any Secret for 1, or what's another great example? What if you pull an Ultimate Infestation off of this and it costs 1 mana? That's nutty. So this card is awesome. I really look forward to playing with this card. The 10 random cards from your opponent's class is problematically inconsistent. The thing is, if this was 1 mana shuffle 1 from their class into your deck that costs 1, it wouldn't be good because it would be too inconsistent. If it was 2 mana shuffle 4, maybe some of the time you hit something you really like. But the fact that this is shuffle 10 means you're almost certainly shuffling something of ridiculous quality into your deck. The only issue is drawing it. So mostly you'd want to play this alongside a ton of card draw. I think some people have said, hey, what about Myra's Unstable Element to go with this? But, I mean, maybe you could do something that's like, oh, I've fatigued myself. I'm going to Academic Espionage you and then draw all of them. I don't think that's good most of the time. So this card, this is again, it's not just an endgame value card, or it could even maybe be considered a mid-game potential value card with some inconsistency, some along the lines of Faldore Strider. But you have to draw those cards. So you want to run a whole lot of just ordinary draw in this deck. So something like Prep Sprints. I don't know. I don't know what all of the largest draws are in the game, but I don't think Rogue has that much access to consistent draw. It's just Sprint, which is maybe Sprint is not too expensive if you're expecting to draw cards that cost 1. But you hate to sprint into 3 unplayable cards that cost 1. So I think this is a cool card. Has the potential to be extremely overpowered if you high roll. Has the potential to be very underwhelming if you low roll. I wonder if you could compare this to the Yogg effect, where you just get to the end of your deck and you're like, well, we're out of tools. Go. And maybe you'll get good stuff that wins you the game, and maybe you get terrible stuff that doesn't let you win the game. I don't know. Maybe it could see play in that sort of a space. But of course, it is just an awesome, fun card, and I look forward to playing this. Myra Rotspring. Myra Rotspring? Battlecry. Discover a Death Rattle minion. Also gain its Death Rattle. I think this is a bad card. It's very self-sustaining in that you don't have to play this inside a package at all. You don't have to do anything with this in order to make it good. You can simply play it. The issue is that I think there are enough Death Rattle minions in the game that your average value on discovering a Death Rattle is not good enough, right? I mean, you know, let's say you hit... Let's say when you discover, you get Loot Hoarder, the 5-mana 4/4 taunt that Death Rattles into 2 AoE damage, plus, I don't know, something else crappy. I'm sure there's a 1/1 Death Rattle of some sort, something like that. And just, yeah, you play this, it's a 5-mana 4/2, and there's no guarantee of discovering a decent Death Rattle. So this, again, is something that, even if you high roll something amazing, it's still a 5-mana 4/2 low tempo. So even, I feel like even at its best, this is not a good card, and you have no guarantee of getting that at its best. So I don't think this will see any play whatsoever, even in a fun deck. Alrighty, moving on to Priest. New card, Zerek, Master Cloner. Death Rattle. If you've cast any spells on this minion, resummon it. I think this is a pretty cool card. 6 mana, 5/5, consistently resummon itself, so it's, you know, maintaining pseudo tempo and value. But how many spells are there that a priest will cast on a minion? Right now, the very consistent card you pretty much always run in Priest is Power Word Shield. Power Word Shielding this is obviously fine. what else would you cast on this? Like, there's the random potion, 3 mana, 2/2 gains an extra effect that you could possibly cast on this, but I don't really see any constructed decks playing this. In Wild, you have Velen's Chosen to make it a 7/9, which is okay. The problem is, if you buff this, all of the other buffs that go on this that you put on this card are too high of value, and you're under way too much threat to just have this silenced. Because obviously this card is trash if it just gets silenced. Maybe it could fit into a deck that just has tons and tons of death rattle threats. So, like, things that you want to silence, but I don't feel like there's enough cards to cast on this. One of the hilarious additions to this, though, is how it teams up with Reckless Experimenter. If you Reckless Experimenter into Zerek Master Cloner plus Powered Shield, fundamentally that becomes like a 4-mana 5/5 because it costs 3 less, so this costs 3, and then it dies at the end of the turn, but you'll have cast something on it, so it would resummon itself. Still, I don't feel like that's a good combo. It's synergy. It's not powerful enough synergy. So yeah, in general, I would say this card could be cool, but it's too vulnerable to silence, and I don't think there's enough buffs to put on this card. Maybe you could... Yeah, I don't think the cards currently exist to enable this being any good. Moving on to Paladin, there are 3 new cards here. Crystology, 2 mana, draw 2 1-attack minions from your deck. The only reason I think this card is bad... Well, okay, so here's the thing. Most of the 1-attack minions in the game that immediately come to mind are aggro-type things, you know? And the problem is the current go-to aggro paladin is Odd Paladin, and this is an even card, so it doesn't fit into that. Also, since it draws them instead of playing them, that feels not as good. I think the places where this card really shines is actually in a control paladin. If you combine this with a bunch of irritating 1-attack stuff in your deck, if you consider like Tar Creeper plus Righteous Protectors plus... I can't think of anything else that immediately comes to mind. But, you know, irritating 1-attack minions. I think this could be a fine card for drawing survival tools, essentially. But it's still a little bit... I'm not going to say slow. It's about medium speed in that if you're playing this against an Odd Paladin, if you're playing a control/value-based Paladin, this card is sad to play on turn 2. I think you'd rather have some sort of other defensive play, but might not be too slow. It helps you out a little bit in the early mid game, but doesn't help you out immediately in the early game. In those cases, you want to actually just draw your Righteous Protectors. But yeah, so this might add some taunt/survivability consistency to this deck. You especially combine that with this card, Crystalsmith Kangor, Divine Shield Lifesteal. Your healing is doubled. This card is fantastic. It doesn't have taunt, but I don't think that matters. The fact that it has Divine Shield against token decks means that it basically has taunt, because you can just buff this, you know, if you Blessing of Might this or something. Yeah, I think this is just a completely fine, essentially anti-aggro card that you can throw in to help you pay ping off tokens, or your opponent has to deal with the Divine Shield, because Divine Shield is just irritating. It also heals for 2 if it ever hits anything. So I think this is a pretty decent card. I actually, interestingly, don't feel that it's legendary power level. I almost feel like this should be an epic. I feel like this should be a 2 of in a deck where you would want to run it. I mean, which legendaries do you run where that's not true? But I feel like having 2 of these in a deck is not crazy overpowered. So yeah, I do feel like Crystology plus Crystalsmith Kangor are pushing a little bit of an anti-aggro package for Paladin, which could be decent in building a control Paladin. Especially, again, you combine that with this card, 5 mana, Shrink Ray, set the attack and health of all minions to 1. Obviously, this is not good against a token-based deck. Something like Token Druid plus Odd Paladin, this doesn't really do anything against. But there's a lot of bigger decks where this could have a lot of value. Imagine playing this on your opponent's Hadronox board, right? That's pretty good. Especially you play this along with a Consecrate. It's almost like a second equality. Which also gives it continued synergy with, what's it called, Pyromancer. So, yeah, I think this is another enabler of Pyromancer. It's essentially a second equality. It also nerfs your opponent's attack quite significantly if you don't have the follow-up to actually kill it. So this is another slow down the game, survive longer type card. So yeah, all 3 of these pushing definitely a slower control Paladin type thing. And I think that's good. I do think control Paladin has not been a thing for a while. And I'll be excited to see a non-odd Paladin viable in the meta. However, the issue with that then being, and I saw this point made, I think during a Kripparrian video once, where if aggro Paladin is absolutely ridiculously prolific, then when people queue up against Paladin, they're always going to mulligan their hand a certain way and be looking for their anti-aggro tools. That means if you're a slow control Paladin, you have an automatic advantage because your opponent has thrown away all of their tools. You know, if you're playing against, like, Quest Warrior, very often the warrior wants to throw away, if not always, wants to throw away its quest against odd Paladin. So if he throws away his quest thinking he's against odd Paladin, and then you turn out to be this slow, heavy control Paladin, he's kind of wrecked. So I think it will be cool to see a non-aggro Paladin viable in the meta, but I'm also sort of sad to not be knowing what I should be mulliganing for when I play against this. Mage. 2 new cards. Cosmic Anomaly, 4 mana, 4/3, spell damage plus 2 elemental. Lots of interesting things to say about this one. 4 mana, 4/3, spell damage plus 2. That's some very cheap spell damage, which is pretty bonkers. I believe, I was going to say I think this is the first time, I think this is the only class-specific spell damage we've seen in Mage, but I was actually forgetting Black Cat. 4 mana, 4/3 is not good enough for stats. But the fact that it's an elemental has sort of some weird implications because you can play this immediately before Servant of Kalimos or Blazing Elemental, which is the 5 mana, 5/5 that draws you a card if your elemental synergy is active. So does this fit in the currently existing elemental package to go along with Big Mage? Possibly. Only because spell damage plus 2 on a Blizzard is pretty good. But here's the thing. If you play this for spell damage plus 2 on a Blizzard, I'm pretty sure you'd just be playing Celestial Emissary instead. So the question is, if it's on turn 10, and you need to Blizzard your opponent's board, do you want a 2/1 and a ping? Or do you want a 4/3? And that's tough to say. So this is a niche card. I'm going to say a tech card. It's not generically good enough to just play. Spell damage +2 is strong, but there's not enough. Without Ice Lance, I think there aren't enough options to combo this with Burn to just blow up your opponent. So yeah, I'm going to say this is not going to see very much play, but might have niche in certain situations. I do think that the current Elemental Mage lacks for 4 mana plays, so this might be okay. I might compare it to Leyline Manipulator. When do you want spell damage +2 and 2 health? Or, I'm sorry, when do you give up 2 health for 2 spell damage instead of the reductions on cards that weren't in your hand to start with? I don't know. But Leyline Manipulator is not an auto-include anyway, and this feels weaker than that. So, or I should say more situational than that. So, Shooting Star. I love this card so much! Ah! Deal 1 damage to a minion and the minions next to it. For 1 mana, this is fantastic. It is such a good anti-aggro card for just picking off tokens, pinging off Divine Shields. Even in Big Mage, this is fantastic because Big Mage suffers from the fact that all of its AoEs revolve around even numbers, and you really want to be able to, like, blizzard your opponent's board and then ping something to get a water elemental. If all your opponent's board is 2 health or 4 health, Flame Strike kills everything. Blizzard kills everything and leaves it at 2, and there's no good ping target. This gives you the 1 mana option to set up a ping, which is awesome. You also can combine this with spell damage, obviously, in order to make this a pretty decent AoE, right? Like, you combine this with Celestial Emissary, and this is 3 mana, put a 2/1 on the board, and deal 3 to up to 3 targets. This is nutty. This is so good. This is absolutely the early game removal package that Mage has been lacking for a long time against token decks. Because, you know, you have Frostbolt for medium-sized targets. You had Arcane Blast for medium-sized targets. That's not in the game anymore because I think that was Karazhan. But this card is bonkers and is basically an auto-include in, I'm going to say, every single Mage. Aggro Mage is going to run this just to maintain its tempo, right? Like, if you play this, if your opponent says, let's say you're an Aggro Mage against Odd Paladin, right? Aggro Mage against Odd Paladin is one of the most unfavored matchups for Aggro Mage, Tempo Mage, just because you don't have any way of dealing with all of those tokens outside of some people have been running, for example, Arcane Missiles plus Cinderstorm, but there's a lot of randomness to those cards. Imagine on turn 2, you play a Sorcerer's Apprentice plus this to remove the 3 things that your opponent put on the board. It's just so good. I'm so looking forward to this card being in the game. It goes in Big Mage, goes in Aggro Mage to protect your board against the tempo your opponent is trying to build up. This card goes in, I'm just going to say, every single Mage deck. Actually, of course, I will leave this out of one example, which is there's a new elemental. With the addition of Giants to the elementals, there's been a Book of Specters Elemental Mage deck that's been popular, which obviously you can't run this in that because you're very likely to just discard this. But outside of that, I think this card is fucking fantastic and amazing, and we'll see a ton of play. And if you're not playing it, you should. Hunter. Cybertech Chip. Give your minions Death Rattle, add a random mech to your hand. I don't think it's a good card. This is all of your minions. Some people have compared this to the old Infest, which was 3 mana, give all of your minions Death Rattle, add a random beast to your hand. Is adding a random mech to your hand better than a random beast? I don't think so. I haven't seen any mechs that have been completely overwhelming. and that's the thing. The value of a random mech just isn't high enough. I'm not comfortable with the 2 mana. It's 2 mana add late game mediocre value. You could almost really compare this to Omega Assembly, right? Except you need minions on the board. 3 random mechs is not that good. So I don't think this is a good card. Any late game value you're looking for, you're just gonna want to play Deathstalker Rexar anyway. I'm gonna skip over Boommaster for a minute. Fireworks Tech. Battlecry. Give a friendly mech +1/+1. If it has a death rattle, trigger it. At first I thought this card was bonkers because I was thinking that this could target any death rattle minion and it would only give it +1/+1 if it was a mech. That was clearly the mistaken way to think about it. You have to hit a mech. You must hit a mech with this. And if it has Death Rattle, trigger it. So, for example, something like Spider Bomb. I do think there's synergy here between Fireworks Tech and Spider Bomb, because if you put a Spider Bomb on the board, your opponent is typically not going to want to kill it unless they have the ability to swarm the board first. You can think of it as the Obsidian Statue effect, because with the Obsidian Statue, right before you're about to play it, you want to put all of your cheapest, crappiest minions on the board and hope that the Obsidian Statue effect lands on one of those instead for low value. So if you put a Spider Bomb on the board and your opponent opts to just play around it, you know, if they have a 3/3 on the board, they're not going to want to trade into this because your 2/2 trades for their 3/3. They'll just be like, great, fine, I'm going to ignore it, go face. What are you going to do? Then you can Fireworks Tech it and become a 3/3 and you instantly kill something. So that can be good. But are there good enough mechs with death rattles out there that are worth giving this effect to, such that running a 2 mana 2/1 is good enough? I honestly think the answer is no. I'm sure someone will try this Fireworks Tech Spider Bomb combo. It might be okay in a slow meta, which we're sort of in, but sort of not. The problem with being in a slow meta is very often I feel like this will get Shadow Word Pained or Frostbolt, and you won't hit anything with it. So this is definitely a removal package. I mean, heck, if you wait until the late game and play 2 of these alongside this, it's a 4/4 and it's a 2/2/1s, a 4/4, and kill 2 random enemy targets. Pretty decent, but is that good for a removal option? I don't know. I feel like it would be difficult to beat Deathstalker Rexar in terms of late game value and control right now. But maybe Deathstalker Rexar gets to a point where he feels like he has better... Maybe these are better early game answers. So, not overwhelming, but could see play. Boommaster Flark, 7 mana 5/5. Obviously, those stats suck. Battlecry, summon 4/0/2 Goblin Bombs. I don't have the image handy. I'll just put it up here in a second, down there somewhere. Goblin Bombs are 0/2s that do random damage to... No, I'm sorry, they do 2 damage to your opponent's face. So this is essentially 7 mana 5/5, slowly deal 8 damage to your opponent's face. But you can't attack in the Goblin Bombs. The thing that's interesting about this is I feel like this is decent follow-up to an aggro hunter where you don't want your board to get cleared. Like, obviously, it's really good for protecting your board. Your opponent can't just blizzard you in order to save their own face because they're going to take 8. And if they're on 7, they can't blizzard you or they just die. So I think this is a really good way for sealing a game. But if aggro hunter is floundering for ways to end the game by turn 7, I don't think that's a good deck. I think instead of Boommaster Flark, you'd probably just rather run extra early game minions to make your early game more secure in order to more consistently not have to reach turn 7 in the first place. Obviously, these Goblin Bombs are mechs and can synergize with Fireworks tech, so if your opponent ever opts to leave the bombs alone, you can do them that way. Plus the fact that you give them +1/+1 means you can trade them into your opponent's board. So obviously, if you do something like Boommaster Flark and then double Fireworks tech, you can instantly hit your opponent in the face for 8. Well, on turn 8, but still, this is like I'm going to say a weird combo. These clearly all fit into a package. I'm actually going to say these are not all in the same package, because this, I think, is an execution tool for finishing off a game, and this card is either going to synergize with Spider Bomb to control the game, or it's going to synergize with Boommaster Flark to end the game. But I don't see a deck where you run both Spider Bomb and Flark. And so this is something I've said about how I like to look at cards in packages rather than individually, is that Fireworks tech goes in a mech execution deck, mech aggro, and I feel like Hunter hasn't so far been released the aggro tools to make that work, and mech control. But these go opposite each other, So this is a decent card in that it enables a lot of things, but these are different decks, and I'm not sure how that plays. I think it would be cool to see Control Hunter. Not so much more aggro Hunter. Moving on, we have Druid. Only one new card here, Gloop Sprayer. The first time I saw this card, I was disgusted, because I'm thinking to myself, if you hit a valuable minion on the board, that's great. You know, if you put a Lich King on the board and the opponent can't deal with it, you can just play Gloop Sprayer and get a second Lich King. That's fine. I mean, it's an 8 mana second Lich King with a 4/4 body attached. Sure, why not? The thing that scares me is anything you would play this alongside with. Most notably, anything that could possibly be free. So I previously talked about how problematic I expect the Treant package to be, mostly as a result of landscaping. I think it's going to be hilarious to see 2 0-mana 8/8 rushes played and then Gloop Sprayer go down inside of them to create 4 0-mana 8/8 rushes. Outside of that, I don't see this card being good. This is all I'm saying. In order for this card to be good, essentially you have to play it along other cards that are close to or next to free. Yeah. In Wild, I could see this being comboed with Aviana to do crazy Malygos shenanigans that we've seen in previous years, like Aviana Kun, back up to 10 mana, everything costs 1 less. Or, I'm sorry, every minion costs 1, that's 2 minions. You play Ixlid, that's 3. You play Malygos and summon an extra copy, that's 5. You would play Gloop Sprayer between the 2 Malygoses. No, I'm sorry, you play Ixlid, Malygos, that's 5. You would want to play Gloop Sprayer between the Malygos, which would give you 8 minions. So you'd have to get rid of one of your own minions somehow, like a Naturalize. But that's fine. And then you've got 4 Malygoses on the board. Yeah. Which, whee! But not really necessary. I feel like this card was 100% printed to go along with this card. So how could this card, if these hit 0, these are amazing. This card is amazing if you play it alongside 0-mana cards. So this goes further to my package analysis concept here, where, simply put, Treants feed Dendrologist, Dendrologist feeds Treants, Treants feed Mulch Muncher, Mulch Muncher is utilized by Gloop Sprayer, so there's, again, just too much synergy going on in this package. I'm disgusted already. And that finishes us up for me, it is July 29th, 1:03 p.m., but I am definitely high on the GMT scale. I think +5, question mark? Yeah, I think +5. So, that'll do us for now. Join in next time as more cards get revealed.